the economic activities that have multiplied, the business activities that have multiplied. If you aggregate it at the national level, we see similar momentum across the country. We are seeing in the real growth rate in the GDP, which is now at 8.2% for the nation. We are seeing this along with the gross value added that is expanding. So it's not just GDP, but also the value added component which is expanding, and it is expanding at 7.2%. We are seeing that this is better than the previous year, and in last 10 years, the consistent growth, despite of COVID in between, when it dipped, issues and dimensions have multiplied. And we are seeing the sectors where infrastructure, housing, services sector, exports, all have expanded in a major way as we are seeing economy growing forward. This unprecedented pace of economic expansion in a large economy like India, we are already placed at number 3, which we would occupy very soon. And we are trying to see in terms of how this expansion of economic activities remain inclusive. I am also on the board of the Reserve Bank of India, and from Reserve Bank we are consistently trying to ensure how economic expansion brings in the financial inclusion. All of you might be aware in terms of how Mudra and Mudra related dimensions have contributed, and to what extent they have brought in, again, gender in the reverse way, more women beneficiaries and more actors who have played an important role in this regard. Mangalore is also now being described as city of startups. The number of startups that have multiplied in Mangalore city, the DPIIT, the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, which issues statistics on startups, you find Mangalore going ahead up in the number, as are the other tier 2 and tier 3 cities. We are also seeing the idea and the commitment in terms of climate change, where more and more startups are coming in, more students are applying their minds in terms of how we are going forward, and this we find in terms of how we are going forward. Today, in my conversation with you in next few minutes, I would cover 2 dimensions of engagement. One is more of general nature, where I'm trying to bring in this new development paradigm that India is talking about. During the G20 presidency, we introduced it in India, and now we are trying to bring it at par with multilateral development financing. We are trying to bring it as part of our development goal. And the second is in terms of how do we reduce the gap that is there between the think tanks, the research institutions, and the universities. Somehow in India, structure has emerged across universities where research focus is required to be more driven. Senior faculty colleagues and deans are here. I would very much like to recommend in terms of how we can reduce this gap. I have one suggestion which I would pick up at the end, but at this point I want to bring in the new idea that India's G20 presidency has placed on table in terms of how we look at the changes that we need in our lifestyles for reducing the carbon footprint, for reducing the dimensions of emissions that our consumption patterns are bringing in. As probably you may be aware, in Varanasi, when there was a development ministers meeting of G20, we adopted what was called as Varanasi principles, or principles for lifestyle for sustainable development. China was against this. China was continuously blocking us in Varanasi, but still many countries agreed. It was initially called as lifestyle for environment, and later it became lifestyle for sustainable development. And this is what something that was accepted, and this has gone forward in terms of how we are going forward. So what is life and what is lifestyle change that we are talking of? There are 5 facets of life that I think are important for us. When we talk about lifestyle, we are talking about individuals, so how individuals can contribute in climate change, and you are seeing individuals have started reducing consumption of plastic bottles, plastics all across. We are trying to reduce that. We are trying to bring in lifestyle which is less carbon intensive. This is not to be done just by individuals, but also by institutions. And when institutions bring in, we also have to see how banks are more conscientious of this fact that they do not fund projects which are going to have carbon footprints. Individuals are going to change their lifestyles. Educational institutions can bring in, and cumulatively we can reduce this challenge which is all across. The 5 facets which are important to understand as we analyze this, the first and foremost is this of sustainable consumption and production. How we reduce the consumption which is not warranted, which is something which is not going to be part of circular economy. So how we define sustainable consumption and sustainable production, it is something which can contribute to circular economy. Circular economy is our ability to recycle, reuse, and of course the act that we are trying to promulgate, quite a few electronic goods where you cannot recycle, you have to retire. And we are trying to bring that forward along with European Union and with United States, so that the right to repair also become our right. So if iPhones, etc., are not able to be reused, they immediately are to be thrown out of the system. They all are accumulating huge electronic waste across. So the first and foremost facet of this idea of lifestyle for sustainable development is about this ability of sustainable consumption and sustainable production. I was mentioning to you about startups in Manglore, and I saw quite a few startups have come up on recycling of products. And this is something where our future lies. And I think it is important for us to consume those dimensions of consumer products which are going to encourage SCP, sustainable consumption and production. The second part is in terms of encouraging social enterprises. As you know, 2019 Finance Minister in her budget speech announced setting up of a new stock exchange, and this is stock exchange which has come functional in 2022, is about social enterprises. So how social enterprises can come in? Sometimes we think that business is only for profit, but there are now many companies are coming in, and at this point in the world there are more than 22,000 companies which are not for profit. Of course they are getting profits, but they are not solely for profit. And these are called social enterprises. They pick up some dimension of environment management, sustainable development. They come up with their products, and then they are circulated and recirculated. And this is what, friends and colleagues, I think is extremely important. And we need to see these social enterprises. The SEBI has already issued the guidelines. Firms are now getting listed on our social stock exchange, and this is one dimension which would have a huge impact. The third facet, which is I think equally important, is in terms of our idea of resilient infrastructure financing. I saw a lot of infrastructure coming up in Mangalore. How we can ensure resilience and sustainability. To what height we take our buildings to, where groundwater is manageable, how groundwater management would be taken care of, how the parking, etc., would be taken care of. Those dimensions are things where resilient infrastructure is of great significance. The financing for resilient infrastructure is important. RERA and other dimensions of our efforts, and through Reserve Bank, also efforts have been made as to how we reduce the cost of that finance. Unfortunately, the global financing situation is such that countries which require more such resources for infrastructure are paying much higher rate of interest than the countries where they are already grown up. So Germany, if it pays only 0% as rate of interest, countries in Africa and Asia pay as high as 8 to 16 to 29% of rate of interest for accessing capital. How do we reduce this gap is something which is extremely important. The fourth facet is more about technology. How we bring in the appropriate technology for circular economy, for reduction, and also for taking it forward in terms of our dimensions of engagement. The fifth, and that I think is extremely important, is in terms of ethics, and this I share very much to impress my young colleagues, students here, to do not forget the value of life in terms of how we go forward, but within that enshrined is the idea of ethics. Somehow we have stopped talking much about ethics in our public life and public value system. But unless and until we bring it back in our thought process, the idea of adopting, infusing new value systems would always be a challenge. It would be quite a major disaster if ethics is out. And this is something which we are trying to see in terms of finance, and particularly for countries where finance is not able to reach at the cost that it should. So these 5 facets of life are going to contribute immensely in terms of new lifestyle that we want to have. Now I come to the last point in terms of how this lifestyle adoption of these value systems can be taken forward. When G20 presidency started, Prime Minister asked my institution and me to reach out to universities to brief them about G20. 75 universities were chosen, and you would be glad to know, Honorable Governor, we could reach out in the country to around 101 universities across the country. And these 101 universities were briefed about India's G20 presidency, about women-led development, about life, about digital public infrastructure, and the new initiatives that India has launched. And this, I think, is important. The presidency's year is over. Now Brazil is leading G20. We are trying to now build up further on that work. 25 universities have been shortlisted in the country, where we are establishing University Connect Hub. And this is largely for faculty colleagues here, the deans. Our effort is to integrate social and natural sciences. How do we reduce the gap between social and natural sciences, bring in dimensions of engineering and commerce, economics, and other social sector streams to have this gap minimized. More and more development paradigms that would come up in the years now would focus on the dimensions where this convergence is appreciated. We are too much divided into subject streams and almost into silos. So how natural sciences and social sciences can talk to each other, how we can bring in dimensions of integrated development approach, which are important in terms of this. Think tanks, fortunately, because of the policy focus, are running ahead. Universities have to catch up. And I think it is important for us to focus on new methodologies, new literature, and new approaches on development to prevail. I stop here. Thanks for your attention.